rich people, always flying off somewhere.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Vegan Vanguard. It's Mexi, and today we have a super special guest on the show. If you've listened to this podcast at all or follow me in any way, you'll know that I absolutely love the Media Roots radio podcast hosted by Robbie Martin and Abby Martin. So today we have one half of that duo here to talk to us today. So welcome, Robbie.
Thank you for having me.
And Robbie, also, like beyond Media Roots, you also do documentary films, right? So you have A Very Heavy Agenda, which is a trilogy, which is amazing. I don't talk about it as much on my channel or like my Twitter feed as I do Media Roots, but I loved those videos.
No, thank you.
I don't know if you want to talk a bit about them or...
Sure, yeah. I mean, I have, it's a trilogy, like you said. I kind of feel weird calling it a trilogy, but it technically is. And I guess the only other documentary film I'd want to publicize that I've made is called American Anthrax, and that one is much easier to digest. It's only 40 minutes. And that one covers a very specific subject, which is the 2001 anthrax attacks and a lot of the questions still surrounding that. Mm-hmm. But I guess I'll throw this out there too. I haven't really publicized this in a while, but I did something that's also very long. It's almost 4 hours long. It's called American Bisque. It was sort of my first experiment in trying to make a documentary film. That one is a little more experimental. It's kind of like a very long music video with really dark political content sort of overlaid over the top, and it basically goes back to the Vietnam War, to the present, and shows some of the most horrifying imagery and basically propaganda that the American government is responsible for, set to electronic music from each era that I'm showing in chronological order. So that's the only thing that's sort of maybe notable about that one. But I recommend people who have weak stomachs or who don't want to see imagery of real death, which I completely understand, to avoid that one. But it's out there on YouTube. It's called American Bisque, if anybody wants to check that out.
Yeah, very cool. So I'll link these all in the timeline so people can check them out. But yeah, well, even your first video from A Very Heavy Agenda had quite a long sequence where it was just music and then kind of these horrifying like news clips.
That was my I was basically throwing in something that was like a miniature American Bisque in the middle of that documentary.
I remember I actually got high to watch that video, and I just remember that sequence was just so dizzying and horrifying to me. But yeah, I felt it was really powerful. So, but yeah, I would definitely recommend those, because I would say that on my channel and in this podcast, like I talk more, I guess, about economics or systemic issues. Like I look a bit more abstract at the system of capitalism and how its inner mechanisms drive things like imperialism and war and everything. But I love these documentaries and Media Roots because you guys actually really dig into exactly how this stuff manifests on the ground and like through which institutions and people and all of that. Because I feel like if you're looking at the systemic level, which a lot of us do, you kind of forget that this is actually carried out by actual people and like actual groups. And it's really horrifying to see who is doing that and like why and where the money is coming from and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely coming at it from kind of not opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're coming at it from different angles. And yeah, I think that's, to me, what's most fascinating for me personally is the psychology of some of these individuals who are sort of like directly instrumental in basically fucking up the world. Mm-hmm. And we know a lot about the oligarchs and sort of the household names, but in A Very Heavy Agenda, I guess part of my goal was showing people that I think do incredible damage that nobody's really heard of. And specifically the Kagan family, who I'm personally obsessed with, is like a family where almost every member of the family is directly involved in this sort of war making, think tank propaganda culture. So I found them very fascinating, and yeah, I think more people should be aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't actually even know that much about them until I watched the documentary. So Yeah, I was really floored. But I'm also interested in the psychology because, I think a lot of leftists are kind of against the whole like conspiracy-ish stuff. Not against it, but they just kind of feel like that misses the mark in a sense, because if you get really obsessed with individuals, then you kind of forget that, even if you replace those individuals within this system, you would still have the same result. But I find it fascinating to think of like, well, why is that? Like, why is it that if you put people in these positions, they end up these maniacs? Like, where does that come from?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well, a lot of people on the left do sort of reject what you're talking about, and I mean that's something that we try to do with Media Roots Radio is bring in things that are sort of conspiracy fact, I would call them, and a lot of that gets jumbled in this bigger mess of, you're a conspiracy theorist or that's a conspiracy theory. But as we see today, even things like questioning all these frankly suspicious chemical weapons attacks happening over and over again in Syria makes you a conspiracy theorist, and so does questioning Russiagate. So, I think right now more than ever is probably the most valuable time to, question a lot of things, perhaps more than ever before. So, so yeah, I don't shy away from that. But I mean, but at the same time, on our podcast, we definitely sift through things that we would consider bad conspiracy theories, like QAnon or Pizzagate, and sort of shift those, so sift through those and put those in one camp, and then things like, that Russiagate is mostly sitting on a tower of propaganda, and most of it's unproven. So, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you do a really good job at parsing out like the politics behind all of that too. And you can point to exactly like who's benefiting from these things, and it's scary. So
yeah.
So today we're going to talk about Alex Jones, free speech, censorship, Silicon Valley, all of that good stuff. So I know you've been following Alex Jones for quite a while. I think you were following him even before he kind of went mad, and then you've kind of tracked his descent into madness. You had his ex-wife on recently to talk about that. So yeah, you're pretty much in the know when it comes to Alex Jones and InfoWars, etc. So I think most people listening to this podcast probably have heard about Alex Jones being banned from all of these platforms, because there's been a lot of either celebration or I guess more hesitation about the implications. But I guess we could start with maybe outlining what happened and why, like what was the stated reason for this to happen, and then maybe put this into context a little bit if you could.
Yeah, so I guess the larger context I'll start with is, and this is something that Abby and I have been talking about frequently on the podcast, is that after the 2016 election, we were presented with this idea that Donald Trump won the election because of a Russian disinformation, Russian meddling campaign, where they essentially, quote unquote, cyber attacked us to get the candidate of their favor in, which was Donald Trump. We had another narrative also presented after the 2016 election that was a little more of a nuanced narrative that says that Russian disinformation and Russian meddling is a campaign designed to sow discord in our country and to polarize our country even more than it already is. So to create a wider gulf between the left and the right and these different political camps. So that was sort of what Abby and I saw as a disinformation campaign in of itself, being presented by think tanks, various media outlets, mainstream media outlets, and also intelligence agencies. Right after the election, the Obama administration had the Director of National Intelligence Office release a report essentially laying out the case that Russia was meddling in our country and was doing all this damage to our political discourse. And in that report, they actually quoted Abby. They quoted her, a line she said from her show on Breaking the Set. So as soon as we saw that, we were obviously very alarmed that Abby would be on their radar.
Sorry, that was 2016?
This was 2016, yes. Okay. And it was right before the inauguration, but right after the election. So I think it was sometime in, I want to say late November, but I think it was more like December 2016.
Okay.
And when Abby and I saw that her name was in, or actually the creepier part was her name wasn't actually in it, but they quoted her a couple of times, and we recognized the quotes, and they mentioned RT, the network, and we found this very unsettling, obviously, because what they were laying out in this document was that Abby, by suggesting that the two-party system is a sham, that's the actual quote they quoted of her in this report, was sowing discord. That's the narrative they were trying to present in this document. We obviously found that very unsettling, because that's a very common refrain or thing that you hear from people in America who are sick of our two-party system. So that was very troubling. And it was also troubling that Abby's name wasn't even mentioned in it, so that really the only people who recognized these quotes were people who'd watched her show. So unsettling for a different reason, right? So so many months passed, and then all of a sudden it became this big hysterical thing that that there was collusion between the Trump campaign to get him in Russia to get him elected, because apparently the narrative goes WikiLeaks worked with Russian state actors to leak these emails from John Podesta and Hillary Clinton. So just giving all this context, I think, is important, because it sort of explains why we are where we are today, which is we're in the middle of this climate now where social media networks have started working with these sort of fake news bodies, organizations that stated goal is to help vet the internet for fake news and to help remove fake news from social media platforms. And I should have mentioned earlier that the term fake news became intertwined with this idea of Russian disinformation. So, for example, if a Russian media outlet put out something skeptical of that, that Assad launched a chemical weapons attack, and other media outlets ran with that same theory, all the other media outlets by proxy could now be called Russian disinformation, or they're towing the Kremlin line, or they're just fake news. They're conspiracy news. So this all became this, this messy narrative where it all became conflated together. So you had this organization called Prop or Not that got a giant article written up about it in the Washington Post right before the Donald Trump inauguration, listing dozens of anti-imperialist, anti-war websites under this umbrella of Russian disinformation. They included websites like counterpunch.org, antiwar.org, Black Agenda Report. And, this was all very, very troubling, obviously. But I believe we didn't actually start seeing the effects of it, the serious implications of it, until fairly recently. And around the same time that Alex Jones got banned off of multiple social media networks, all within the same 24-hour period, we started to see Facebook remove the Telesur page, for example, which is a Venezuelan and joint Latin American country funded news organization that takes anti-imperialist positions. And then we started to see a bunch of left activists getting banned off Twitter. And, I think the most troubling thing about this, let's just talk about the InfoWars ban, is that it all happened in a seemingly coordinated fashion. So one could make the argument that it was because of organic terms of service violations that Alex Jones has become so unhinged, so dangerous, and so crazy that they needed, the social media networks needed to shut him down based on their own terms of service. But I think that the timing needs to be looked at, because I believe that it is under this greater umbrella of combating fake news, and it is creepy and frankly very unsettling that he would get purged off of these networks all within the same 24-hour period. There does appear to be some kind of coordinated effort there, and it reminds me of when, and I'm not putting Alex Jones in any way in the same category as Assange or WikiLeaks. I think he's much more of a charlatan, but it does harken back to when WikiLeaks first came out with the collateral murder video, and we heard that Joe Lieberman called Amazon to get their website shut down, because at the time WikiLeaks had their website hosted on Amazon servers. We heard that PayPal and other credit card companies, in a coordinated effort, stopped processing donations to WikiLeaks. That speaks to some kind of I hate the term deep state these days because it becomes so distorted, but that speaks to some kind of coordinated effort between government and corporate entities to do something that I would describe as kind of deep state-ish. And it gets really dicey because like this is almost it martyrs Alex Jones in the sense where he's been saying for years that the quote unquote the deep state's coming for him. They're trying to pull him off the internet, and now it seems like it's almost like in a way he's been right about that, unfortunately, because it seemed to happen virtually overnight. So
yeah.
I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. We could talk about some of the ins and outs of all the different, because he presents a unique case. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of this like deep state thing, Facebook is now working with that Atlantic Council, and they are funded by state agencies and like.
They're funded by NATO. They're funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. They're funded by defense companies.
Right.
So they're funded by it's a split between actual U.S. government agencies and like companies that manufacture weapons and things like that.
So I guess I'm wondering, like, why is Facebook now working with this Atlantic Council? Is it just because of public pressure and wanting to keep their stock value high or whatever? Because I mean, and you've talked about this on your show a lot, that even if the Russians did meddle in terms of putting out information, I mean, most of it wasn't even disinformation. It was just information that put the Democrats into a bad light, or like far left information. But that probably didn't have that much of an effect compared to a lot of other things, like the Cambridge Analytica thing, which was funded by Republicans. So it kind of seems like the things that actually had the most impact on the voting public and getting Trump elected, etc., were right-wing things. But then somehow, I guess in the narrative, it got spun to be like, no, anyone left of center somehow is promoting the Kremlin line. Yeah. So I just find that kind of confusing.
Well, it is very confusing. And I mean, but if you think about it in terms of a way to weaponize, I guess that's not the right word, but a way to essentially marginalize everybody who's not towing the mainstream narrative. It's kind of the perfect way to do that, because it essentially makes anyone who differs from those conventional narratives, like for example, that Assad is repeatedly launching chemical weapons against his own people, even though he knows, and most people know, that that's the moment when the rest of the world will be like, okay, now he's crossed the red line again, and now we need to attack. Just simply doubting that now makes you, a Kremlin propagandist. And I think that example reveals what the true nature of this is really about. It's to marginalize and stifle essentially any dissenting voice. And I think that also includes people on the right. Even though I do believe that the left and dissenting voices from the left pose a far greater danger to the establishment in this country than the right does, but I also think that they're a target as well. So you'll see conservatives sort of spinning this issue and turning it completely partisan, saying they're shadow banning conservatives. Silicon Valley is all ran by liberals. They're all on the left at Twitter. That's completely missing the actual greater point, I think, which is that any real dissenting voice that veers away from this conventional narrative or narratives will be marginalized or stifled. And I think that it's almost a way to stem the flow of what the internet was evolving into, which was more of an egalitarian, equal playing field. Yeah, if you want to put out fake, like let's just say you want to literally put out blatantly fake news and hoax people, you could do that on the internet. I mean, the internet allows you to do that. This is a way to just stem and prevent, I think, the internet from growing into what it was originally designed to be, which is like a free and open platform to share ideas. And I do think that a lot of people in the establishment and in this corporate world are getting scared of that. But at the same time, you brought up the issue of why would Cambridge Analytica, for example, had a much bigger impact. And we saw Facebook brought in, Mark Zuckerberg brought in to testify about this. And there's this mindset, I believe, among a lot of these Silicon Valley executives and companies that they feel like they want the government at this point perhaps to regulate them so that it's hard to articulate this, but I feel like they actually in some ways want regulation now because they realize how powerful they've gotten and they don't want to do anything to actually violate the law at this point. But I think actually more importantly is they don't want to be blamed for throwing the election to another candidate like Donald Trump. Because and so I think that's almost what it comes down to is so to obfuscate the blame, they are now hiring these editorial bodies, to determine what's fake news or not, so that in the future, if something terrible happens, they'll be like, no, we had a system in place to vet fake news. It's not our fault. We did a really good job to vet fake news or whatever the hell that means. But then you look at companies like Google, and they've actually been doing this before the 2016 election. They've been deranking state media. They've been deranking media they've already deemed fake news. And that's all in the eye of the beholder, this term of, this concept of fake news. So that's where it becomes a really slippery slope, I think. And I think that slippery slope argument is very valid when you really lay all that stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I remember during the Cambridge Analytica thing, a lot of people were saying, we're not going to use Facebook anymore. We're not going to use Facebook. And I know they really took a hit. So in terms of just, needing to continue their profit motive and everything, I understand why they would, I guess, partner with this Atlantic Council. But something like Cambridge Analytica, which is what they came under heat for, like they weren't necessarily even putting out fake news, right? Like they were just getting a lot of data about different users and about their politics and then figuring out ways that they could influence their thoughts by, I don't know, their timeline or whatever. And I actually listened to one of your podcasts that Facebook is already doing that. And like we already do see stuff that's only curated for us, like I only see the post from like 5 people in my like 800 friend post, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like after the 2016 election, it came out that, like you're not seeing everything. You're only seeing things that are curated for you anyway. And so that's why so many people thought that Hillary had it on lock. And even in the Ontario election, we just elected somebody who is basically Trump light. Like he's this crack dealing misogynist, right? Like horrible. He wants to be Trump basically. And he got elected. And a lot of us were like, what the hell? Because all I was seeing on my feed was everyone voting for the socialist-ish party, or not socialist, but social democrat. So it was just like, oh, what the fuck? And you realize that you're not seeing anything anyway. Right? So like,
well, the social media companies, I mean, they create a reality tunnel where it really can warp your perspective on what like regular people across the country are feeling or thinking. I mean, especially when, I think the egalitarian side of it was what got a lot of people like me originally to buy into the concept of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, because it felt as if there was a legitimate, even though it was a privately owned company, and this is very naive to look back on my mindset of it at the time, but this is sort of democratized. Your stuff comes up in the order when it was posted. You see all of your friends' posts in chronological order. You don't have to click on your friend's profile to see their posting because it will just automatically come up. That's not how it is anymore on Facebook. And that was a modification they did over time, gradually. And that's, even way before what we're talking about with this fake news stuff. So they were already getting us to buy into this concept of it's fair, it's democratized. And they slowly peeled that back and really and made it much more narrow what you're allowed to do on Facebook, what you're allowed to see. And I think actually in some ways Twitter is one of the only holdouts in sort of these major Silicon Valley companies. But we've even seen Twitter is starting to, well, not starting to, they've done this actually as far back as a year ago, change the sort of chronological timeline aspect of Twitter too. So originally you used to see tweets come up in the order they were posted. You used to see everybody's tweets that you were following. And now they say they actually have a policy. You look at their, I don't know where it is on their website, but they explain that no, we're not like shadow banning people. We don't block people from showing up on your feed, but some people you might still have to click on their profile to see their tweets.
Mm-hmm.
So they're actually talking out both sides of their mouth there, because from what we understand about the way these services are supposed to work, a democratized service would actually show everybody's tweets in the order in which they're posted. You wouldn't have to click on
Mm-hmm.
someone's profile to see it. That kind of defeats the purpose. So they, inch by inch, they sort of take away these little features that we thought
Mm-hmm.
made it a democratized and egalitarian system, until we sort of get used to this more boxed in, narrow framework, and we eventually just get used to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the boiled frogs analogy is very overused, but I think it's very apt here, because I believe that's what these Silicon Valley companies have done,
Mm-hmm.
is they created this very exciting environment for us to think that we had a fair shot, when in reality we really don't.
Mm-hmm.
And even something as trivial as becoming a viral YouTube star,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like even that's going to be taken away eventually, because it's just too risky. I don't know if it really helps their profit margin to create an egalitarian democratized system at the end of all this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I don't think it does.
yeah, so I think we really have, I make this argument a lot, but I believe it to be true, is that I feel like we have set ourselves back. Just activists as a whole have set themselves back by relying on these social media networks instead of just using them to supplement their own activism in other places, whether that be in real life, whether that be mailing lists, whether that be physical, snail mail. So I feel like we ought to be thinking about going back to some of those classic techniques. I mean, even just a physical mailing list. I mean, how many activists out there are doing that right now? And I feel like not enough,
Yeah, no, it is really scary, because I remember even way before this, I mean, in the Harper years, which is like 2006 to 2015, a lot of activists in Canada were using Twitter to try and organize different protests and whatever. And we were already being watched there. Like, they were already seeing like what we were going to do and infiltrating us and whatever. So they've been doing this forever. Actually, I think you had a podcast about the military roots of the internet itself, which was kind of chilling. But I totally agree that
with like Yasha Levine, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was really terrifying. But yeah, we've gotten to this place where and like a lot of us who are doing like online activism, it's like we don't have huge networks in real life, or even, I guess if we did, people would be more apt to like give us their mailing address. But like if I tried to reach out to my followers on YouTube and be like, yeah, give me your mailing addresses, like nobody would do that. They'd be like, you're gonna dox me or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's scared now, So yeah, I mean, we definitely set ourselves back, but we're also in this place where how else do we connect?
Well, it's a double-edged sword, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I've been really thinking, I guess, about like tactics to combat this, but I think we can get to that at the end. That's probably like jumping ahead way too much. But
sure.
I guess going to this idea of the why now, because what was all of their reasons for doing this at this exact moment? Because as you've said, Alex Jones has been breaking their terms of service for quite some time now.
Yeah, and it needs to be said that Alex Jones has really known how to work these social media networks to boost his own viral success and popularity. And at one time, they immensely profited off his presence on their networks. So that being said, why now? Why did they decide that he's finally violated the terms of service? Because if you look back at his past 2 years of work, he really hasn't changed that much since Donald Trump. I mean, he's been calling for violence on and off for the last 2 years on his show. He's been insinuating violence against real individuals. I mean, I think even most recently he said something about Robert Mueller. So if we're just honing in on what may have triggered it, it could have been his death threats to, like his veiled death threats to Robert Mueller, which generated a lot of publicity. You could also look back to all these lawsuits that have been accumulating against Alex Jones as another reason why these social media networks finally caved to pressure. All the Sandy Hook families that Alex Jones has been going around saying that their kids didn't actually die, horrible, offensive things like that. He's been getting sued over that. Chobani Yogurt sued him for insinuating that they're bringing in like Muslim rape squads or something like into their factory. I don't even.
God.
I'd have to look at that specifically to see what he was saying. But yeah, Chobani Yogurt sued Alex Jones. So, you know, a bunch of people have. I think James Alefantis, the owner of Comet Pizza, definitely sent Alex Jones at least a very stern, threatening legal letter of some kind. I don't know if he actually took him to court. So, you know, there's definitely been a lot more publicity recently too about how Alex Jones is unhinged. He's calling for civil war. Media Matters, which is owned by David Brock. People who don't know who he is should look him up. They've been trying to generate as much hysteria as possible about how Alex Jones is dangerous for the past 2 years. And I think in some ways that all that has culminated into, we got to do something about Alex Jones now finally. So I think there's some truth to that, is that there was an organic pressure building against him. You know, some of it organic, some of it not. I would say the David Brock end of it is definitely sort of politicking, you know, more in that mold, even though the things that Media Matters does point out of Alex Jones, I'll look at the articles sometimes and be like, wow, this is a great clip they pulled of Alex Jones calling for civil war. You know, that's good that, you know, even though it's David Brock, I'm glad somebody's actually watching his show. Kyle Kalinske of Secular Talk does a great job of pulling Alex Jones clips like that as well, and sort of you know, critiquing Alex Jones. And he's very familiar with Alex Jones. He's known about him going back as far as I think 2008. So Kyle has a very good perspective on it. But I think to answer your question about why now, I think that what's most troubling about it is that it happened all in a very short period of time, like a 24-hour period of time. And I think that when you really look at that, it must mean some level of coordination between these different corporations. And I think even though we can all agree that Alex Jones is hateable, that he's a scam artist, that he sells supplements, you know, that apparently some of them have lead in them. He's, you know, he makes millions of dollars off of fear mongering, that it's still spooky, and something is unsettling about the fact that, you know, 3 or 4 companies getting together in a 24-hour period can essentially erase your presence off of the internet. And I would almost argue that even though Alex Jones is a terrible figure in many ways, he's still a part of history now. And to sort of erase him from history, and you could argue, well, he still has a website. You could still look him up on Google or whatever. I feel like YouTube at this point represents, in some ways, it's a piece of history now, and I feel like it is in the public interest, even though it's a private company. So that's when, you know, you can't make the argument that this is a First Amendment issue because it's a private company, but it's very chilling to me that at any time, any of these companies can just erase history and erase a large part of what, you know, something that used to be accessible to everybody. Even if you're just looking at Alex Jones from a critical point of view, for example, A Very Heavy Agenda Part 4, which I'm working on right now, I had all these clip links. I stupidly didn't download them already. I just had all the URLs and all the time codes already written out for all the edits I was going to do. Now I can't get any of those clips because they're not on YouTube anymore. So even if you're looking at Alex Jones and you want to study him from a critical point of view, it's more difficult now because they've removed all of his videos from YouTube. So I find it very troubling, and I think that I do think it's short-sighted to see his removal from all these social media networks as something completely separate and isolated from what's happening to Telesur and this larger push to combat fake news in this climate that we've entered in after the 2016 election. And then also Roger, you know, then just throwing this in the mix, this is just my speculation, but Roger Stone may be indicted soon by the Mueller investigation. So, you know, maybe that has something to do with it. You know, I don't know. Maybe someone from the Mueller team got involved. I mean, this is complete speculation on my part, but I'm putting these pieces into place because Roger Stone is like on InfoWars every single day. I mean, so I don't know exactly what happened, and I don't think we'll ever really know. But unfortunately, there really isn't anybody on the left or really anybody saying, look, this is troubling because corporations did this in seemingly coordinated fashion in a 24-hour period, and we should examine why this is, because when we
Mm-hmm.
examined why it happened at WikiLeaks, we found that government officials were calling these
Mm-hmm.
corporations on the phone and putting pressure on them to remove the shit. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the way I would stress people to look at it. But and people can construe that as a defense of Alex Jones, but I feel like it's not really defense of him specifically. It's just we should look closer at what's happening here, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Are any of the other social networks working with the Atlantic Council, or is that just Facebook?
For now, that's just Facebook, I think. But now that you mention it, I think Google is also working with them.
Mm.
And what's interesting about Google is they were working with people who were part of Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Lab actually as early as 2015. They were paying a guy named Bellingcat, who now runs a larger website called Bellingcat with a team of people who later became the Atlantic Council Digital Forensics Lab. So Google was actually very ahead of the curve on this and was de-ranking and fighting disinformation or fighting fake news even before the election. So, and then Julian Assange wrote a book where he had a face-to-face conversation with Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, for I think multiple days. He visited him when he was on house arrest, and essentially, I mean, it really lays out a convincing case that Google operates almost as if it's a geopolitical player in geopolitical affairs more than it does as a corporation. That Eric Schmidt actually sees himself as someone like as if he's in the U.S. State Department. So, yeah, it's very creepy. I mean, and just imagine all of the power that Google has, just in terms of the information that it has. I mean, it's in some ways it might be a more powerful surveillance tool than even the NSA or the CIA in some regards. So, yeah, it's really scary to me.
No, absolutely. No, that is really, really scary. And just like how much control Google has over all the information that we see also. Like I feel like I need to stop using Google, just like use a different search engine. But I always say that, but I never start using it, but
yeah. And I don't even know if other search engines, I mean, yeah, I don't know if there are other search engines out there that are as powerful as Google. I mean, there might be still, but yeah, I don't use them either. And yeah, that's goes back to what I'm saying about we've bought into all these things and we're just used to them now. And it makes us feel like we don't have other alternatives because they're so useful. I mean, even just, Gmail. Is it's surreal to me that we've all bought into that as well, because it's really not that amazing compared to other email services. It's pretty much the same, but yet we all use it. I mean, I use it. I use Google Drive, and all that stuff is connected to their system, and they could, they say they just sniff the emails with an algorithm to send you ad requests or whatever. But and this is something I've actually never said on a podcast before, and I'll say it here because it just came to mind, and I guess enough time has passed. I'm not really afraid of it coming back to me now, but I asked for Google whistleblowers and Facebook whistleblowers to contact me. I actually bought a Facebook ad of this 2 years ago as an experiment. They let the ad run, surprisingly. They probably wouldn't let it run now, calling for whistleblowers of their own company. So I got approached at a party randomly by a guy claiming to be a Google contractor. He turned out he actually was, and he said he was going to take documents from Google for me that would prove that they were making ad money off of questionable child pornography-ish websites. Now, that actually already came out in a story after that. He never got me the documents. He quit Google. But what he did tell me that actually creeped me out even more, if that wasn't creepy enough that they're doing that, and that's been proven, and there's been an article that's come out since then from someone else, he admitted to me that he was spying on musicians using their Google search history that he wanted to have a business relationship with.
What?
And he was telling me this as if it would be something that I would find funny or interesting, and instead I just thought he was a total fucking psychotic person. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
was really angry when I heard this, and to think that a singular Google contractor has access to your Google search history if they know your Gmail address, and they could just look it up
Ugh,
with no consequences and not be caught. Very, very creepy. To think
wow.
about what kind of information they have access to, because what does your search history show? I mean, I mean, for some people, it could show very revealing things like, like porn search results or things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So, um, very, very troubling, to learn that just a regular Google contractor thought that that was funny to tell me. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I feel like we're already
yeah,
living in this like total dystopian nightmare, and it's hard because obviously we want to get our information out, but where do we get it? But so I guess yeah, it's interesting that all of how many of the networks it was Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Facebook, all at once, but not Twitter.
yeah, not
I'm just
Twitter, no.
wondering why that is.
Well, did you see Jack Dorsey from Twitter has been getting immense heat
Yeah.
recently from the media. They've been bringing him on to interview him and ask him why.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, as much as I don't, I mean, the guy is, I don't really respect him as a person, but I respect what the stance that he's taking, because he makes a good point. He believes, I mean, his main point is that even though Alex Jones is putting out things that can be construed as hate speech, and he might be perceived as dangerous, it's still in the public interest for people to be able to respond to and to address the things that he's saying. Because if all this stuff is just hidden from us, then in terms of, even if you agree Alex Jones is doing enormous damage, why would you not want to, why would you want it all to be hidden from you? Because then you won't really know the impact necessarily that it's having. I think it would be harder to gauge. So I feel like I think his argument's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there's another argument that I don't see people making, and I was making this on Media Roots, is that I don't think you can conceivably make the argument that Alex Jones and InfoWars poses a greater danger to society than, say, for example, Fox News does, or Laura
Mm-hmm.
Ingraham, or Sean Hannity, or Tucker Carlson. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff they put out on their shows is, barely coded white nationalism,
Mm-hmm.
fear mongering about immigrants, about minorities. I mean, it's really dangerous stuff that really does probably cause violence in this country in ways that we have really no way of knowing. So
Mm-hmm.
they're still on YouTube, and they're always going to have a YouTube channel. There's no argument. Nobody's arguing that Fox News should be removed from these social media networks. No one's
Mm-hmm.
making the argument that CNN or other networks that lied about the Iraq war should be removed from social media, yet
Mm-hmm.
their propaganda led to the deaths of almost 1 million Iraqis. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it needs to be looked at multiple angles, because I don't think that I don't think Alex Jones and InfoWars pose a great enough danger that they need to be removed. Because if Alex Jones is, say, for example, violating the First Amendment, if he's actually, doing the proverbial crying fire in a crowded theater, and violating free speech laws, then yeah, I mean, he'll be impacted by that, and he deserves to be. But I don't think that it's reached that level yet. I mean, I mean, he's so crazy though that, I mean, he might at a certain point. So,
Mm-hmm.
and again, he is the perfect case study for someone to ban off all these networks where most people won't bat an eyelash, because he is unhinged, crazy. He's a charlatan. And I think that that's maybe part of why they did it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's speculation. I don't know exactly what their reasoning was internally. I only know that their public reasons is that he violated terms of service, it was hate speech, and he had to go. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what Spotify, Facebook, and I think YouTube even used the same reasoning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess that kind of brings up like broader questions around inciting violence and what that means, and to what extent we do have a responsibility to try to protect people when somebody has like millions of followers and they're directly calling for violence against certain people. I guess for me, it's always frustrating when people talk about violence, like, because I always think about like slow violence in terms of the violence that's just wrought upon everybody simply by living within this political economic framework, or the violence of imperialism and racism, etc., and violence against immigrants, etc. So it's like, on the one hand, like you said, people like Fox News, CNN, who are propping up this kind of slow violence, or this violence that we don't immediately see. That's fine. Like, everything's fine with that. But like the kind of more in your face violence of just like a street riot or somebody calling for whatever, someone to get hurt, that's the kind of violence that we step in to stop. But I guess I wonder, because obviously these companies, they'd be liable if they, well, I don't know, would they? Like, I guess before, Facebook used to say that whatever the users post, it's not our issue. Like, we don't control what they post. But now it's like, would they be liable if somebody came out and said, I hope that this person gets killed, and then they get killed? You know what I mean? Like, where do we draw the line in terms of somebody trying to incite violence, and like, who do we trust to be the arbiter of what is violence?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think technically they aren't liable for that. And I think that and I still don't think they are. So I think that while that is definitely an issue, and while on the surface it does seem like you can make the argument that Alex Jones his rhetoric had gotten so violent that he needed to be banned, I think that the reason that they banned him has more to do with the topic you brought up earlier, as the Cambridge Analytica pressure that came slamming down on Facebook after that. They don't want to be responsible for the political outrage machine like coming after them for throwing another election. I think that when it comes down to individuals committing violence, we have had so many examples of that happening, and it was announced on social media first. For example, let's just take Facebook for an example. How many acts of violence that have been committed in real life that were announced on Facebook first? Mm-hmm. I think that's going to continue. And I think in terms of people at Facebook, I think that that's a relatively minor issue. The world is a violent place. And I think that that's probably how they look at it. It's just, well, we have 2 billion users. Out of those 2 billion users, there's certain percentage of people who are going to commit violence, and our platform allows them to announce that, or even Facebook live stream their own suicides, or they're murdering people. I mean, so
they are,
and that's still, you can't even prevent that. That could happen today.
People are murdering people on Facebook live streams.
I think I don't know if it's happened more than once, but people have been. I can't actually. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I know that ISIS has posted like beheading videos and stuff like as Facebook videos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was their original sort of like, we need to do something to stem these violent, politically violent videos from being on Facebook. But I think in terms of why Alex Jones was taken off, I do think it has more to do with this combating fake news. We cannot be responsible again for being, I don't even think they feel responsible. If you really talk to like Zuckerberg off the record, I believe he takes no responsibility. But I think that he knows that the public pressure on him will be enormous and they will blame him. So I think that has more to do with that. They don't want the blame. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, but again, you do have to wonder if they're working with these U.S. government-funded agencies to combat fake news, what other politics are in play there? And it's hard to say, because I would just be speculating, but I do think it has a lot to do with politics, that maybe some of these people in Facebook and Google now do see themselves as having this patriotic duty to fight Russian disinformation or fake news. And I think that probably plays some role too.
Well, yeah, I guess if politics are really heavily involved, then it does make the Alex Jones choice really, really crafty, because now the conversation isn't really around fake news or, Silicon Valley's control of our information. The conversation is around, to what extent do we have a responsibility to ban people who are inciting violence? And that isn't a question also, though, because it's like, well, let's say, Jordan Peterson starts calling for much more violence. It's like, do we have a responsibility to kick him off, or do we not? It's like, how do we draw that line? Especially because if we did try to draw that line, like leftists would be definitely affected as well, because leftists talk about, punching Nazis or,
Yeah.
overthrowing the bourgeoisie, which is kind of could be construed as inciting violence, or talking about like the cops. And obviously, those things are reactions to the really insidious slow violence that the system rings upon everybody. But still, I guess this, like, where to draw the line is a bit murky, especially if like marginalized communities are being hurt.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the free speech laws are like in Canada. I mean, but in America, there's been enough Supreme Court cases where, sorry, I said United States. So instead of saying America, it makes me sound very, very America-centric. But yeah, I mean, there's been so many Supreme Court precedents and cases to define very clearly what is a violation of the First Amendment, what isn't, what's, the proverbial crying fire in a crowded theater. So I feel like there are very clear lines here, and this is the corporations aren't beholden to those laws. It's arbitrary. So
Mm-hmm.
they can dictate whatever they want in terms of like what's considered hate speech,
Mm-hmm.
what's considered, a violation of their terms of service. And it's I mean, arbitrary is really what it is. There's really no rhyme or reason to it, even though
Mm-hmm.
I think I watched a debate on The Intercept where someone debating with Glenn Greenwald was saying that they've defined their own terms of service policies around hate speech laws and similarly to First Amendment laws. And even if that was their intention originally, I feel like they cannot be trusted. I mean, there's no
Mm-hmm.
way that we can expect these private companies to follow the First Amendment. I mean, they clearly
Mm-hmm.
don't see themselves as being in the public interest. They are narrowing the framework of this. They are limiting what we can say and do on these services.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll repeat it again. I mean, they can literally erase history now.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what the solution is to that, other than not relying on them. But I keep going back to this idea of erasing history because I do think at this point in time, Facebook has 2 billion people on it. It's existed for long enough now where it is part of history. There's a
Mm-hmm.
large amount of human history on that website.
Mm-hmm.
And so there does need to be some kind of public control of it somehow. And I just don't know how you do that because they've just become too big to like really properly regulate at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a dilemma. Like they really have
Mm-hmm.
gotten too big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess if they're not liable, then it just becomes about like public pressure or public sentiment and just not wanting to get bad press, not wanting to have their stock value get hurt or whatever. So it does become arbitrary, and it does become kind of this mob mentality of whoever's upset about somebody saying something can, or even on YouTube, if someone's upset about something I said in a video, they can just do this mass flagging thing and then it's down, right? So,
Yeah, and I think that makes Twitter sort of the only holdout in the sense that it'll be interesting to see how long they last not caving to some of this pressure.
hmm
They've already definitely caved to some of it, and in ridiculous ways too. Let's not forget that they sent emails out to perhaps millions of Twitter users saying some of your tweets that you saw in your feed between this time and this time may have been Russian propaganda. We're just letting you know.
hmm
I don't know if you got one of those emails. I didn't get one.
no.
I actually a few of my friends got them. So that's kind of a weird thing. Why would they even do that? Was
hmm
that from public pressure? I
hmm
would say that that's not from public pressure, that's from political pressure.
hmm
From the think tank class, from the intelligence class,
hmm
from other people who are calling them on the phone. There aren't people picketing outside of Twitter demanding that they, do something about Russian disinformation. It's the political
hmm
class that is.
hmm
So I think that they're playing a delicate game here where they are not caving to public pressure and somehow, they're keeping InfoWars online.
hmm
But I mean, we'll just have to see how it plays out because I think that in time they will cave. I mean, to even have
hmm
faith that Twitter, who's already totally changed around the egalitarian nature of their system, is going to not cave. I mean, I think would be
hmm
naive. So,
hmm
but for now, they're the biggest holdout. So,
hmm
um, only
Yeah.
time will tell, I guess.
But I mean, and I know like a lot of my friends get banned off Twitter all the time. So I mean, like they already ban a lot of leftists anyway for like the most marginal of things, right?
Totally.
And it's a temporary ban, so eventually they can come back on anyway. But they're already kind of doing that on for like smaller accounts. But I guess that kind of feeds into this whole discussion or conversation where a lot of people are saying it's not that they're applauding Alex Jones getting taken down, but a lot of people are saying like this isn't really a slippery slope because this has already been happening for so long to leftists.
Yeah.
Like I've seen a lot of posts where people have saying, you know, trans people, people of color have already been being banned or shadow banned and all of this stuff for so long, and their voices, you know, it's never a free speech issue when any one of their things goes down because they just don't have any following or they don't have any money or anything like that, right? So I guess how do you respond to that kind of just the discourse about like this isn't a slippery slope, like it's already like leftist voices are already so marginalized or already subject to so much censorship that, you know, Alex Jones is not like the, I don't know, a tipping point or something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my mind, I think both arguments can be true because, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the left has been the main target of this. I would argue that all this like right-wing hysterical like media stuff that's really exploded, you know, during the Trump era, I believe that it poses far less of a threat to the establishment and the status quo than genuine left, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist media does, by far. So that's always been a target. I mean, even if you look back at the J. Edgar Hoover era, you know, the era when the deep state became more, you know, the idea of it, not the term, but the idea of it became more well known to the American public. Almost all the people being targeted by that system, by the FBI, by COINTELPRO, were leftists. So yes, it's definitely nothing new, and we have always been under threat and under, and especially the most marginalized among us have been under threat. But I do still think, that being said, that this InfoWars mass banning, coordinated banning, does show a tipping point in the sense that they really decided to go for it this time. And I mean corporations getting together and coordinating this purge at the same time. And yes, I don't think, like, I can totally understand why there's a lot of leftists cheering it on, but I still think it is short-sighted to not see this as not just a continuation of purging and banning leftists, but they've enhanced the well, enhance is the wrong word. It's become something more intense now. We're on top of this marginalization of leftists that's happened throughout history and on the internet. We now have this idea of combating fake news that pulls in, that makes the sphere even larger in terms of what is considered threatening and what is considered, you know, fake news, or that shouldn't be, you know, it shouldn't be in the public interest. So I guess I just really still believe that it does present a tipping point. And I've actually, I mean, and you know, this is an annoying thing, especially after Ben Shapiro was like, I'll give $10,000 to debate Ocasio-Cortez or whatever. But I put out an inquiry saying, hey, I know I'm kind of alone here in this opinion on the left, you know, speaking about Alex Jones this way, but I'd like to like talk with another leftist about it who has the opposite perspective. And nobody responded to my request. And I wish someone would, because I really would like to have what you just said. I really would like to have a wider discussion just about that. And to see if we could come, you know, me and another person could come to some kind of middle ground there and be like, yeah, both of these are true. And, you know, this is a tipping point at the same time as it's been happening to us for a very long time. So I guess that's where I land on it. I don't know if that was a helpful answer. I kind of went all over the place there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can see that both things would be true in some sense, right? So, I mean, I think it is kind of incredible. In terms of optics, I think it's interesting that they chose Alex Jones because, first of all, he's somebody that these corporations have all profited immensely on, especially YouTube with like ad revenue, etc. So, and it kind of makes it seem like, yeah, you know, we're not just banning the leftists, like we're going to go after high profile right wing people who give us money too. So I think in a sense that even kind of helps the whole, well, it does two things. It helps the right wing side who says that we're all being censored and rah, 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 free speech. But then it also helps on this kind of, yeah, Russiagate type thing where it just makes people acquiesce to the fact that all of these pages are going down. Like nobody would get upset. Like not that many people even mentioned that Telesur got taken down or whatever, right? So because it's just this whole kind of people just see that as like, well, good, you know, they're evil, like we need to get rid of them, right? So it kind of just feeds all into that. So I can see obviously this is a tipping point in a lot of ways, and it is something we should be concerned about in a lot of ways. And then on the other side, I can also see that I guess maybe the question is, considering leftist voices are being banned all the time and are constantly under threat, in the context of us already being banned all the time and marginalized, does fighting for the rights of Alex Jones, does that do actually anything for the leftist cause or like for leftist voices to continue to get any airtime at all within this like Silicon Valley framework?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very good point. And I don't think that it does, because I think directly, if your position is directly fighting for Alex Jones's free speech rights or something like that, no, I absolutely don't think it helps the leftist cause at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm trying to look at this in a broader sense than Alex Jones. I think what you just said like a minute ago was very, what you said, I think that is the most scary is, so banning Alex Jones creates a giant blow up and media storm. I mean, it's going to grab all the headlines. Everybody's heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
What's scary about that is we know they're banning leftist pages. We know they're banning leftist accounts. We know that this is happening at the same time. And Alex Jones will be fine at the end of the day. He's a multi-million-dollar operation. He's going to be fine. So I'm not defending his like platform in the sense that like I don't think that, you know, like he's going to be fine. The people who won't be fine are these almost virtually invisible leftists and organizations like Telesur who get banned sort of in the middle of this climate, because we'll only hear about these people, like these sensationalist people like Alex Jones getting banned, which most people can cheer on his banning, while at the same time not even realizing and not even having any awareness that these other bannings are happening sort of under the cover of darkness. And I think that to me is that's the real danger to leftists. And I think that when you look at it that way, I think that it's, you know, you have to do it delicately and carefully, because in the leftist community, a lot of the things I've said during this podcast could be construed as a defense of Alex Jones, even though it technically isn't. It's just I'm just really trying to emphasize we need to have an awareness of what this whole greater system is doing. And for example, like Abby, you know, there's people who've been calling her a conspiracy theorist for years. So if we're on this track now, we're even just like, let's not even talk about the political side of the content. If it's just things that lean conspiracy at all, and people start talking about banning that now because of Alex Jones, then that puts us directly in the crosshairs, regardless of our political ideology, you know, and if we're left or right. So the fact that we're left and we have conspiracy leaning views sometimes, I feel like we're not, you know, the specter of banning us or shadow banning us or whatever, it's very close to us already. And I would argue that our Media Roots presence on Facebook has dwindled significantly, even though our actual audience has grown significantly. So it's an odd thing when you see your actual likes and your reach on Facebook dwindling over time as your actual listening audience is growing. So that's odd to me. And, you know, I'll sound paranoid for saying that we're being shadow banned, but there's really no other way to explain it. So I feel like this is already happening to us on some level, but we're still allowed to post on it. Actually, Media Roots is no longer allowed to pay to advertise like $40 boosts for our episodes like we used to do, because it's political. It says it violates their terms of service now. So we feel that it is inching closer and closer to us. And even, if you look at, like, for example, like Scott Horton, who runs Libertarian Institute, Anti-War Radio, he was banned off Twitter during around the same time that this all happened. And, he's a much more obscure figure than Alex Jones. So again, it's like nobody even realizes that that's happening. But, and regardless of your view on libertarianism, he interviews a swath of very important, I mean, he has over 1,000 interviews with some of the most, important anti-war imperialist leftist people out there. So, and even if, like, I'm just going to, and this may, maybe this is going to make me sound like an Alex Jones defender again, but if you go back to like the Bush era of Alex Jones, it provides a valuable public service in the sense that he had on guest after guest on his show that were anti-war left activists and politicians, like Dennis Kucinich, for example, used to go on InfoWars all the time during the Bush era. A lot of figures like that did, and now those interviews are simply removed from YouTube. And I believe even if you hate Alex Jones, those people coming on his show, that's still in the public interest to hear those interviews. So I think that that's something that people are neglecting to realize too, is that at one time, whether you hate him or not, Alex Jones used to appeal towards a left-leaning audience. In fact, I knew regular Democrats back during the Bush era who used to listen to him. So it wasn't always this hateful, foaming at the mouth right-wing outlet. So I don't think most people even know that. I mean, because to most people, he is just this crazy, gun-toting, pro-Trump conservative, and he's definitely evolved over time. I mean, in a terrible way, but I mean, still.
Yeah,
So,
I guess. Okay, so I guess since we do know that the Atlantic Council is kind of behind this, and we know who's like funding them, I guess the idea of Alex Jones being banned is really significant. Whether or not leftists have always been banned, it is significant because he is so sensational, it can be just used as this cover, or it just kind of steals the thunder of every other thing that's going on, because it's like, oh, too bad Telesur got banned, but that's fine. It's not a partisan thing. We're banning right, we're banning left, like we're just cleaning house here, right? But yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's just that, like, yeah, we shouldn't be using these platforms, because I feel like even if he wasn't banned, let's say Alex Jones didn't get banned, but Telesur got banned, I still don't think that many people would have like known or like raised a big fuss about it. It would have still just been kind of this quiet thing. Like leftist voices are getting shadow banned all the time. And I mean, like, I notice if I tweet something or if I post on Facebook and I have a hashtag like Free Palestine, it gets like half the engagement than I get if I don't put any hashtag, or if I, you know what I mean? So it's like, I can already see that we're being, banned or not being given the full breadth of views. And you talked about on your show that like the YouTube algorithms and everything, like they favor things like Jordan Peterson and Alex Jones and all these big sensational things because it brings them money, right?
Totally.
So
yeah,
I mean, regardless if they're banned or not, I guess the end of the day, it's like, well, yeah, we just shouldn't be on these things, right? Because it's like, yeah, this is providing a cover to ban all these other things, but even if it wasn't, we still aren't going to be getting anywhere if people like the Atlantic Council are directing Facebook and the things that are showing us our news and our everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to be only be able to get to a certain point.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the reality we all need to realize, is that while it will feel like, and it's exciting to feel like you're growing your audience in these platforms, especially the bigger ones like YouTube, they will only let you grow to a certain degree now. And I think that should be clear to anyone who's doing like serious activism that's threatening to the establishment. So I think that there are some alternative platforms. I mean, for example, SoundCloud hasn't taken any political stance on any of this. We haven't noticed anything changing with our growth because of all this, but we have noticed it on YouTube, on Facebook. So these bigger companies are definitely already doing something that we can notice. Now, we haven't made a big stink about this on the podcast because it's like we can't prove it. It's just, it's more subtle. It's a gradual thing. But I would recommend people, I wouldn't say don't use YouTube. I would say don't rely on it 100% to get your video message out there. I feel like there are ways to use these social media networks to your advantage to supplement things that you're already making available other places. But when it comes to video streaming, that's something that I believe that YouTube is sort of almost like a trap, because most people, even if you run your own web server and you're a programmer and you develop a video playing applet that's super smooth on your own website, it's very expensive to provide streaming video content, especially streaming HD video content. Most people cannot afford to do that. Most smaller media organizations cannot afford to do that. So that is something where I feel like YouTube is a trap, where they have money to burn. They have seemingly unlimited supplies of money. I don't even know if they're actually making a profit, really. There might be another one of these .com companies that's just burning money. And I feel like that's part of the problem, is we're relying on these things that, that we can never do ourselves. But I feel like, someone was even suggesting to me the other day that like you can still upload a torrent of a video and nobody can take that down because it's all sort of peer to peer. It's, it's fragmented across the internet. That's a smart alternative, but it's not something that, most people hungry for political video content are going to bother to look up. So that's presents a problem too. If you upload your videos to Vimeo, you're going to have a harder time getting people to pay attention to them, even though Vimeo allows a lot of more controversial content. I mean, Vimeo allows, I wouldn't say X-rated content, but they allow like NC-17 nudity and things like that YouTube doesn't allow. So there's less restrictions and less, politicking going on, even though actually Vimeo just banned InfoWars off coincidentally.
Yeah.
So they're, so I feel like that's kind of a unique case again, where it's like, and no one wants InfoWars at this point, except Twitter, apparently, and Periscope, which actually Twitter owns. So I think, these alternative platforms that are less restricted, they're a little more open. Consider using those. Consider duplicating, mirroring your content on other places that aren't, big corporations, or on your own server. So there's another example that happened recently. There's this guy named Scott Creighton, who has a YouTube channel called American Everyman. He's like a left conspiracy guy. He says a lot of things I don't agree with, but I really felt for him when his entire WordPress blog, 10 years of his work was just deleted. They removed his entire WordPress blog for violating terms of service.
Wow.
And I mean, I felt really bad for him when that happened, but at the same time, you can't rely on those kind of things, because if you're putting in 10 years of work, you got to put it somewhere else too. You got to put it on your own server, at least save it on your own computer, have a hard copy of it. So in case something like that happens, you can at least upload it somewhere else. And, there's even people who upload YouTube videos in the form of live streams now, where they don't even render a video and, put it on. It's just, their YouTube is the one saving the video. So I would even recommend to those people who do that, download your videos right after you do a live stream from YouTube. Use a YouTube Ripper program, because you never know. I mean, they can remove that stuff at any time and you'll never have access to it. I mean, the early version of this was like, when you violate terms of service on AOL, they just like blow your account and you lose all your email. And that was, that was super depressing. I remember that happened when I was like in middle school. But now it's like so much worse what they can do to just erase all of your work and history, that just in terms of, if you value your own work and all this time and energy you put in, I mean, it's a terrible idea at this point to rely on any of these private companies if we're just talking about saving and preserving your work. Do not risk it anymore. I think I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have backed up copies of all my videos and my podcasts and stuff, but I wouldn't even know where to begin, like hosting my own server. Like to me, that just sounds wild. So I just feel like
Yeah.
for the average person, it's like,
Well, yeah, I mean, hosting your own server is a little bit of a technical rigmarole. I mean, I used to do it when I was way more computer savvy. I've like devolved significantly in my computer skills. But even if you're just using a server that believes in the egalitarian sort of free speech values, that's good enough, because those servers are not likely to cave to a politician's phone call, for example. There was I forgot if it was a mail server that during the NSA sweeps, this company got subpoenaed by the NSA saying, like, we want all of your data. And the company, instead of caving to pressure, they closed down their company and destroyed all their records.
wow.
That's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
that's what there's people out there who are willing to take a stand and preserve, those kinds of values, and seek out those kinds of companies to serve your content. Especially if you do controversial content. Like, that's very important. You don't have to, host your own server at your own home with your own internet connection, but at the very least, don't put it on like a commercial server like Amazon, or like a cloud, like an Apple Cloud thing. Try to go to smaller companies, and I think that you will find that you will at least maybe have more of a peace of mind about, well, at least Google's not going to just erase my page tomorrow if I say something they don't like.
Yeah.
Because they can't. I mean, they'll have to basically. I mean, but at the same time, like, people have gotten web servers to cave under pressure and delete web pages. For example, the server that hosted Stormfront, that neo-Nazi website, I think it was like GoDaddy. They were just like, fuck these guys. Like, we're going to remove their, we're not going to let them host her anymore. So, that can always happen. But GoDaddy's also a big company. So, I feel like even Stormfront could probably exist on like an indie, server ran by some white supremacist militia person. And there's probably tons of people like that out in the country. But I'm not suggesting people should seek those people out. I'm just saying, find someone who just shares your values and shares, the values of wanting to preserve speech and this egalitarian nature of what the internet, should be, and an ideal version of what it should be.
Yeah. Even these small companies, though, like, do you think if they grow, I feel like the profit motive kind of corrupts everything. Like, if they got bigger and got more kind of controversial stuff on their platform, then they could be kind of in the same position as all these other big tech companies and not wanting to be liable, not wanting to accept blame, etc. I feel like you got to like keep moving to like smaller and smaller servers like every couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you get big enough, you will be in the crosshairs no matter what you do. If you're a controversial figure and you reach a certain level. So people anywhere doing activism need to be ready for that too. That if you're doing something that's upsetting people at the top and making corporations and government officials angry, get ready for retaliation when you reach a certain level, online or and anything else. So that's just the nature, I think, of what we do. And I think, at least in the United States, and I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but but here there's still like an invisible line in terms of like, I feel like the way our sort of soft totalitarianism is designed is we don't know when we've actually crossed that line until we already have. And that's, I think, what creates kind of a chilling effect among activists and journalists out here. So people need to be aware of that too, that there is sort of an invisible line where if you cross it, you will get retaliated against by powerful forces, but it's not defined, I think, intentionally, because we want to pretend like we live in a free society. And that's sort of the illusion. But
do you think there's any value in people kind of organizing around fighting to re-democratize a lot of these things that we're using? Like, is there any value in trying to, bring light to the fact that these algorithms are shit and that they're actually influencing people's behavior more than any fake news Russian propaganda? Like, if we could at least have like a chronological timeline on Twitter, YouTube, etc., like, is there any value in doing something like that? Or, I mean, I know that some people are talking about like different platforms that are more democratizing, that they're like open source-ish kind of stuff. I don't even know how that would work, but I feel like we should be doing something like either I don't know, fighting for more democratized things that we already use, but I don't think that's going to work because these companies are too big. But I mean, I feel like leftists should be creating our own kind of platforms that are run by leftists and like more open source kind of shit. Again, I'm not techie, so I don't know how that would work, but
No, I mean, that's really important. I mean, there should already be an alternative to YouTube that prides itself in, activism and controversial content.
mm-hmm.
And I know there's other websites that do streaming video and stuff like that, but I don't know how we would do that. I mean, I do think a lot of this stuff now is crossed the threshold of being very much in the public interest. Even just Facebook has over 2 billion users. And I was making this argument on the last Media Roots Radio, but I think it's something that we should be considering, where there's already archive.org, which saves almost any available website on the internet and saves snapshots of it over time.
Mm-hmm.
We should maybe consider having an organization that does that for these social media networks and preserves that information.
Mm-hmm.
Like Facebook, there's a piece of history in there. They can arbitrarily remove any of that history at any time. And I feel like we've moved beyond the private sector point where it is in the public interest. And if they're not going to, change their behavior, and if they're not going to like be regulated in the sense that where it becomes like a public utility, for example, then there needs to be some other alternative solution where at the very least we can archive everything that they have, so that if they ever delete it, at least it's still preserved.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I don't know what we could do to, like, even if we open source their algorithm, it still wouldn't change their ability to, for their heavy hand to come in and just be like, oh, this video podcaster violated our terms of service and we remove it, or we got too many
Mm-hmm.
complaints or whatever. So that's always going to be an issue if they're private and have their own internal vetting mechanism.
Yeah.
So yeah, I unless you make it public somehow and more determined by public opinion, but public opinion is not the best either. I mean, like
Yeah.
mob mentality, can get things shut down that are good. So
yeah, so I guess like calling all tech savvy leftists, like we need to make some kind of co-op organizations and just create our own platforms online that we know aren't going to get taken down because we're all running it. But fuck, I mean, people don't have time for that, like people don't have time to be doing all this extra stuff. But yeah, it's something that scares me. Like I think about this all the time because I could easily just get cut off in a second and that's it. Like I don't have that big of a following, so I wouldn't be able to really get back out there. So
well, no, I mean that's the sad thing about someone like, so like, even though Alex Jones got purged off all these networks, he'll be fine in terms of he'll be able to bounce back. He's got such a giant audience that he's not going to be that affected by it. But people like you and me would be severely affected by that if that happened to us. It would significantly impact our ability to reach people. And that's what we really have to be concerned about is most people, most activists out there don't have the resources that he has. I mean, even Telesur, let's just talk about them for a second. Like, they've ran out of funding to pay for the Empire Files. Abby has to crowdfund her own to continue more Empire Files shows right now. They have very limited resources. The economy of Venezuela is in shambles. But it's really creepy when you think about how the Obama administration bragged about calling Twitter, telling them to keep it on during the Arab Spring because they wanted Egyptians and Libyans and whoever to be able to still access social media to be able to form protests. But then you see Facebook just arbitrarily removing Telesur here, or Palestinian web pages that are activist, pro-Palestinian web pages or pages on their site. It's kind of almost the inverse of that, because what happens if there's another 50-day war in Gaza? Or what happens if civil war erupts in Venezuela and Maduro let's say he gets assassinated, God forbid something like that happens. Will Mark Zuckerberg and the Facebook team get a call from the Atlantic Council and the think tank and political class out here and say, we need to shut this down now? Like, we need to remove this because this might actually be, going against the U.S. foreign policy goals. that's a very scary thing to think that they could just arbitrarily, especially during a time of crisis, remove that from the internet. And I think that that's really another very serious concern, is that, you know, and Abby was just saying on the last podcast that so many Palestinians actually get their news off of Facebook. So, you know, how much is Israel having an influence over this? What are they going to tell Facebook if they start bombing Gaza again? Are they just going to block Facebook? I don't know. I mean, it really does raise a lot of questions of what they're able to do and what, you know, what kind of dangers are posed by that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this is really a serious point for leftist activism, and something that we're all kind of complacent in just accepting right now. But this is something that we really do need to actually come together and think about and try to, you know, work together for solutions, because this is, I just don't see this ending well for any of us. And I'm glad you brought up Abby and Empire Files. So I'll put her, I guess, link for the crowdfunding there, because yeah, I was really upset to see that today, that they were shut down because of sanctions or whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, the Trump administration is making serious documented movements against the Maduro government in Venezuela. And, you know, there's been a lot of people involved in the Trump administration who have eerie similarities to sort of 80s Reagan neoconservatism. And yeah, I think that South America is definitely, this pink tide that people were talking about is definitely a threat to the United States government and U.S. hegemony. And you know, I mean, even if we're just talking about like libertarians, I mean, who pride themselves on being anti-war, all of them have dropped the fucking ball on Venezuela because it's socialist and those goddamn commies. I mean, so really, this is not getting nearly as much focus as it should be, because on a lot of issues, the libertarians and the left are usually making the same amount of vocal outrage about these, you know, creeping wars. But with this, it's really all up to the left, and people need to, I think, just need to pay more attention to it. I mean, Maduro, there was just an attempt on his life 2 weeks ago with a drone that exploded. So it's serious. And there was even an assassination attempt on his life before that was coordinated by people in the Trump administration with proxies in Colombia. So this is all really happening. And you know, and the, you know, minor side effect of it is Abby's show isn't funded anymore. There's far more, you know, dire things happening in Venezuela. But yeah, if you like Empire Files, consider you know, helping out Abby's GoFundMe. She just got hours of original footage from Palestinian journalists during the Great March of Return that she was planning on turning into a mini, like a 3-part series. And she's just sitting on all that footage now. So let's get that shit out there.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't take too much funding to get this stuff out there. It's, you know, we just need enough money to eat and, you know, stuff like that. So
yeah, absolutely. Everyone, please donate, because I've seen her posting about that, and I'm like, yes, this needs to be out there. And she does such amazing reporting and such amazing, you know, shows on the Empire Files. So yeah, everyone, please donate. I'll link that in the show notes. Did you have anything you wanted to add otherwise?
I guess just if anybody wants to check out my documentary, they can do so at averyheavyagenda.com. And if you like our podcast, Media Roots Radio, consider donating at patreon.com/Media Roots Radio.
Yes, awesome. I would recommend doing both of those things. Very much so. So I just want to shout out the patrons quickly before we go here. So thank you so much to Jeff Sorensen, Jim Mack, and Insufficiently Woke for your generous donations via Patreon. So if you'd like to support the show, you can become a monthly Patreon donor at patreon.com/veganvanguard, or you can find that on our website, veganvanguardpodcast.com, or you can toss us a one-time donation via PayPal. So thank you so much, Robbie, for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I guess, yeah, good luck with part 4 of A Very Heavy Agenda. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know when it's going to be out. It's really slow going for now, but hopefully right after the new year, maybe. I don't know.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, thanks, and I will see everyone in 2 weeks.